Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us on such short notice on this nice, real actual fall day in North Carolina. Thank you all for putting who's here in the chat. That's actually helpful. This is Monica Johnson-Hostler from the North Carolina Coalition Against Sexual Assault, and I am joined by Carrie Ann Fisher from NCCADV, whom you can see will be monitoring the chat as we move throughout this call this morning to ensure that as we provide information, that we are not missing anything that you all put in the chat. So I think you all know why we're here this morning, but if you would continue to put who you are so we can make sure we know who's here and give lots of love and shout outs first thing this Tuesday morning. The first thing I will note is you may want to go ahead and pull up the grant application, which Carrie Ann has put in the chat. The link is in the chat. And it's, of course, on Council for Women's website, ncadmin.nc.gov/advocacy/women/Council for Women grants. But I'm sure you all have it properly saved, or it will self-populate for you on your computers this morning. I ask you to pull it up because after I do a brief introduction, I'm going to turn it over to Deanna. So at that time, she can walk you through the actual grant application. So again, we're here this morning to, one, celebrate the fact that after a lot of hard work and many of your support, advocacy, phone calls, emails, personal outreach to your members of the North Carolina General Assembly has ensured that both sexual assault and domestic violence were able to receive $6 million each. For both issues. So that means all of our agencies will be receiving a portion of that $6 million. Some of you have already reached out to both NCCASA and NCCADV, both surprised and elated and a little anxious about the amount of money that you'll be receiving that has to be spent by December 30th. We will keep saying that because it is not the 31st, it is December 30th. And so the reason why I said we're both elated and probably a little anxious is because it is a substantial amount of money, especially for our dual agencies to expend by December 30th. So a couple of things I want to say about that is I think I saw Sherry from NCCATV, and I don't think I saw Sky pop on, but the two of them took the information both from the surveys that both coalitions sent out to you all about the type of services, the number of services, and really having you inform our advocacy efforts around this funding. And as Sky and I both said, we totally completed our legislative advocacy this year by being able to provide an increase in funding. However, some of you have heard me say this before, how we spend the money and how we track the money certainly does indicate our ability to convince the legislature to continue to increase our funding. Some of you who've been around a long time like me know that both of our issues were cut during the recession in the 2009 to 2010 legislative sessions, and neither issue really recovered financially from the General Assembly. So we have been advocating both agencies on behalf of both issues for the last 10 years with very little, tiny bits, but very little increase. You also know that when we increase the number of programs providing the services, that also changes the amount that you all receive. So that's whether we increase or decrease the number of agencies providing services to sexual assault and domestic violence impacts the funding that you're receiving. So a couple of things that I want to say for those of you who just joined. The link is in the chat, and I'm certainly asking that you may want to pull it up as we're going to walk through the application. If you've already clicked on the application, you are very aware that the application is unlike our general state funded grants. Thanks to Mary Williams Stover and her team at the Council for Women for being extremely responsive to my calls, some in the early morning, a lot of emails late at night as we were advocating for this money to ensure that the Council for Women were not receiving any administrative funding, but that they absolutely were supportive of distributing this money. and we should also add, they're distributing this money while they're also trying to distribute our state grants. And so I also recognize, not just for the Council for Women, but for each of you, that means you're wrapping up your state grants while you will begin starting the application for this grant. I'm hoping that you will note and appreciate, while still time consuming, this grant application is much shorter. It really is just as short as you see it. It's asking you to determine what you're going to do with that money. And we're going to talk about a few big box, as Mary says, or out of the box ideas that all of our agencies, NCCASA, NCCADV, and the Council for Women, have begun to brainstorm to help some of you think about how to expend that money. I also want to note that the Council for Women is in Department of Administration, and Mary and her team are also working on combining a resource list of all of our underutilized businesses across the state, so that our hopes is not only are we using this money as COVID is designed to do, is to look at the impact of our work and what we can do to address our services with this COVID CARES funding, but also infusing money into our economy. So once we get that together, we will certainly send it to you. And I'm sure many of you know who your community vendors and underutilized vendors may be, that you will already seek them out for some of the services or opportunities that you're looking forward to using this CARES Act funding with. Again, I will reiterate for those of you who are just joining, this money has to be spent by December 30th. Not the 31st, but December 30th. Additionally, it has to be spent or acknowledge the impact of COVID on our communities. And the other thing that I'll say before we move on is please, please, please note that there will certainly be an audit of this funding, because there is not a substantial way that Council for Women will be traditionally tracking this, and they will be tracking it through an audit at some point. But I certainly hope that you all will note that the application is simple, one reporting period, and both coalitions will continuously provide both proactive TA by checking in on you on your application, but also making sure that you have all the resources and information you need as you begin to also chart this this account, particularly around this CARES Act funding, so that all of our agencies are prepared and have everything that we possibly need to move forward. Again, folks are still joining. Thank you for joining us this morning. I'll say one more time before I turn it over to Deanna to walk you through the application. But I want to remind you that this is CARES Act funding, $6 million per sexual assault, domestic violence. You've seen the amounts in your application and the announcement that was sent out from the Council for Women. And NCCASA and NCCADV are pleased to be working with the Council for Women on, one, getting the money, and two, getting it out the door, and three, ensuring that it is spent with the biggest ideas in ways that can infuse our economy in our local communities and directly impact the survivors that we serve. And for some of us, we will also be engaging in hopefully some awareness and outreach activities that will also look at the ways in which our survivors have been able to or unable to reach out to our agencies during COVID-19. Again, I hope you all are enjoying this lovely fall morning, and thank you again for joining us and all of your support to both of the coalitions and our advocacy efforts to receiving this funding on behalf of sexual assault and domestic violence in North Carolina. And I will turn it over to you, Deanna, to begin walking people through the application process.
Great, thanks, Monica. Good morning, everyone. So I am going to share my screen. As mentioned in the chat, this will be recorded today, and that will be sent out to folks to be able to reference. The other piece that I want to make sure folks are aware of is that as we go through this process, you all may be processors yourself and may need some time to think about what we cover today. And so you all are certainly welcome to join the second offering of this webinar, which will be on Thursday from 2:30 to 4. So, all right, with that, I'll go ahead and get started. So just a brief agenda for what we're going to spend our time on together today. Again, the review of the application, which the link is here, again, on the screen. Discussion on creating the most impact with the funds being provided, a Q&A, and just a note about how we'll spend our time today. We'll mainly be focusing on the sections of the application that you will be required to complete, but we want to make sure that you all understand it's important that you review each section of all the attachments, even if we're not covering it here today, so you understand what you are being held responsible for. Okay, so this first slide talks about attachment A. So I've highlighted a couple things. So we're going to start from the very top. The agreement is hereby made between the state of North Carolina's Department of Administration and blank. Here is where you will place your agency name with an address at blank. And this is where you'll place your agency address. Underneath that, you'll see all of the attachments that are included in the documents that you will be downloading from Council for Women's website. So you'll have your general terms and conditions, your payment request form, your scope of work, and your reporting requirements. Make sure that you have all of these together when you prepare and submit your application to Council for Women. You'll see the effective date is March 1st of 2020. And then our termination date, again, December 30th, 2020. The purpose is federal COVID-19 relief assistant grant award amounts. And so this amount can be found 2 bullets down. So under reporting requirements, you'll see there is space where it talks about provide grants to domestic violence and sexual assault service organizations. Domestic violence centers, you will receive $56,603. This is the amount that you will place at the top in this section here. Sexual assault programs, if you're a dual agency for sexual assault, you will receive $50,649. If you are a standalone agency for sexual assault, you will receive $95,454. All right. Next, underneath the amount that you're going to list in this bullet, you'll see scope of work. So we're asking for a brief description. So we're looking for 3 to 4 concise sentences on how your agency will utilize these funds. All right. The next document that we're going to look at is Attachment B, General Terms and Conditions.
Deanna, can I interrupt you with a quick question?
Yes.
Christy is asking, do dual agencies do 2 applications?
That is an excellent question. I'm going to defer that to you, Carrie Ann, or Monica.
Monica, do you know that one? Is Mary on?
Yes, Mary is on.
Mary said yes, dual agencies do 2 applications.
Great, thank you.
In the chat. And then Robin is asking about examples of what is eligible. We will get to that, Robin, that's coming, I promise. And then Courtney asked, funding amounts are per program, not per county, correct? And yes, that is correct. Okay. Sorry,
Thanks, Carrie Ann. It's okay, thank you. All right, so again, Attachment B. This is the section that you'll be responsible for filling out. It's under letter C. You'll see where it will list the department. So Deputy Secretary under the Department of Administration, and then you will fill out the box underneath recipient. So you'll put the executive director, your agency name, your agency address, and the telephone number in which you can be reached. Other parts of attachment B that you'll be responsible for. There is a bullet that asks for the effective period. So this contract shall be effective on October 1st, 2020, and shall terminate again December 30th, 2020. Mark your calendars for this date. Since Mary is joining us, Mary, the October 1st date, is that one that you want to have in that space, or would you prefer for them to backdate it to March?
Mary has stated in the chat to backdate to March.
Okay, great.
Go ahead, Mary,
So,
if you want to chime in.
Hi, good morning. Yes, absolutely. Backdate to March.
thank you. And so when I send out the presentation, I'll make that correction for folks to see, and also add the note of the previous question around the number of applications and if it is based on county or just one agency.
So there are a couple of questions in the chat. One is what exact date in March? So March 1st, correct, Mary?
Yes, March 1st.
March 1st. And then there was a question, so do dual agencies get $50,649 for SA and another $50,649 for DV? And
Yes.
correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought dual agencies got $50,649 for SA and then the $56,603 for DV.
That's correct.
Okay.
Okay. Other parts of attachment B. So this is a signature page. So you will be responsible for inserting your agency name, making sure under the by section you have a printed name, your date, the signature authority, name, and title. So you're going to want to make sure you fill out this bottom box. Oops. And this is where your signature will be. This can be your executive director. Okay. Next is attachment C. So this is your payment request form. So what you'll see is one column that says recipient information and a second column that says payment allocation. In the recipient information, for recipient, letter A, you're going to insert your agency name. For address, you want your complete mailing address placed here, including your suite number if that's applicable. The contact person for your agency, which could be your executive director, it could be your associate director, whoever's going to be responsible for answering questions about the utilization of these funds, their position in the organization, and a phone number in which they can be reached. Under payment allocation, you'll see amounts. I've highlighted this. This is the amount that you will insert, and I have included reminders of what those amounts would be. Under B, amount request for this payment, because this will be a one-time payment to you all, you will only fill out the information requested in B, and this should be the same amount as above. Again, here are the reminders to the side of what those amounts will be. Letter F is kind of organization. You all will make sure you check the box that says other. G, purpose. So again, we're going to ask that you provide a brief statement, 3 to 4 concise sentences on how your agency will utilize these funds. This can be the same statement that you provided on attachment A.
We have a question in the chat. What if we are a government agency?
Then you would check the government box. Great question. I always make, unfortunately, an assumption that we're all 501c3s, but we do have many programs who function underneath their county government. So thank you for that reminder. The rest of attachment C, you'll see, is placed here. The period ending. So this is already checked for you. It should say one-time payment. Match required. There is no match. And underneath here will be your certification of the form. Please make a note that it must be notarized.
Deanna, can you go back to the prior slide? There are a couple of questions about section C.
Okay.
On Roman numeral 2, payment allocation. So the questions were, is C under number 2, date funds requested the date we submit the application? And it's actually funds requested to date, right? So
it is. Mm-hmm.
So that gets left blank?
From my understanding, yes, but Mary, if you want to chime in if that answer is incorrect.
I would leave it blank.
Okay. And that actually answers the other question. Do we put the same amount? So the answer is leave Roman numeral 2C blank.
Mm-hmm. And
okay.
D blank as well.
Yes. Awesome.
Thank you. Great questions. I'm glad folks are really taking their time to go through each section.
And there's one more question. My agency is a dual agency, but do standalone DV agencies not get a larger allocation like standalone SA agencies?
So I'm going to let Mary speak into that.
And so the amount for standalone is 95,454. That's the amount that you're eligible for. Deanna has it right here on the form.
I think she's asking if there's standalone DV.
Standalone DV is the 56,603.
Right. So basically the difference is that it's the 6 million divided by the number of organizations that receive state funding to provide that service. And since there are more DV organizations, that's why the funding is less for standalone DV, correct?
No, there are fewer standalone SA agencies.
Right, that's what I mean.
And so that's why.
Because there are more, DV is divided by more. Yes. Okay. For a fiscal officer signing this notarized form, should we use our CFO?
From my understanding, because this is such short notice, preferred would be of your board treasurer. If that's not possible, then yes, you could have your CFO or other official here. We just need to know who that is and what position they hold and their printed name.
Great, thank you. And Monique answered a question in the chat, but for Roman numeral 2, A and B on the prior screen, the person said, am I correct that we enter no payment amounts in A, which I assume is they're asking about the SFY piece,
yes.
Which yes.
That is blank.
Is blank. And then they said nothing in B as well. It's actually, you do enter the amount in B there, the same amount as you entered on the line above, but you leave C and D blank. Correct?
Yes, that's correct.
All right.
And that's correct because this is a one-time payment. This, if we were going to do reimbursements and allotments, then that's what you would use that space for. But the goal is a one-time payment, lump sum payment.
And one more question, is ED acceptable as the financial fiscal officer if the board treasurer is not available?
So the answer to that is yes. You'll see it says recipient fiscal officer or other official.
All right, I think we're caught up.
Great, thank you. All right, so we're going to look at attachment K, which is your scope of work. I've highlighted the sections that you need to pay attention to, and that you'll be responsible for entering in information. At the top, you'll see grantee name. You want to make sure that you place your agency name here in this box. Period covered, you'll see March 1st. Again, that December 30th date, we ask that you pay attention, mark it everywhere you need to mark it on your calendars and above your desk or wherever to know that that's when the funds need to be spent. Underneath that, you'll see these funds are to be utilized for the site purpose as stated in appropriation bill or conference committee report in compliance with the requirements of General Statute 143C-6-23. The following is a description of activities and accomplishments that will be undertaken by your organization using the provided state funding. So you are to complete the section below. So as you are filling out this section, the things to remember that we are looking for. What is the purpose of your project? So again, going back to that 3 to 4 sentence, concise sentence statements that you have placed on previous attachments. What activities or tasks will you complete in order to meet the purpose? And how will the activities or tasks be measured for success? This does not have to be a lengthy document. Again, short and concise sentences. We don't want this to create more stress for you all than it actually is required. Okay, so usually this is in section where folks have questions. So I'm going to pause in anticipation that there may be questions that pop up in the chat. So Carrie Ann, just let me know if those start to come in.
So far, Deanna, there aren't any.
Okay, great. So underneath that, you'll see the expenditure category, which is you are to provide a general description of your planned expenditures to serve as a guide for preparing an annual budget related to this award. So your expenditure categories, employee expenses, so program-related staffing, service contract and expenses, utilities, telephone, lease-related expenses, goods expenses, supplies and equipment, administrative expenses, your overhead and project management, and your other expenses. Specifically, travel has been placed under this section. And then your total. So this should equal the total amount of your award for which you are filling out, if you're a dual agency, the application. So for DV, you want to make sure it's 56,603. If you are also like a dual who also serves SA, you're going to, on your other application, you want this amount to equal 50,649.
Deanna, there is another question here, and I will punt to Mary again. If we, excuse me, is there a restriction on % of admin expenses?
That's a good question. I think there is an answer to that, and I think it is 20%, but I do need to confirm that, and I will put that in our FAQ online.
Great, thank you, Mary. Okay. And then attachment L is your reporting requirements. So you'll see that you only have a final report that's due. Your reporting period, March 1st, 2020 to again that December 30th date. And this is going to be due January 30th of 2021. So I've marked an arrow here as a reminder. This is another important date that you want to place on your calendar. Okay, so just a quick recap. We're going to recap signature pages. So signatures are required on attachment B and attachment C. On both of these documents, it can be your executive director's signature. Attachment C also requires a notary. A recap with important dates. Your due date for this application is September 30th of 2020. Your end date for this grant is December 30th of 2020. And your final report will be due January 30th of 2021. So now let's talk a little bit about budget. And this is where I think folks had some questions previously about how they can expend these funds. So underneath the title, you'll see the categories that you are allowed to spend these funds in: employee expenses, service and contract expenses, goods expenses, administrative expenses, other, which is your travel. So I'm going to open this up for discussion. How do we make the most of this one-time funding and spend it in 3 months based on the categories you previously saw, and how to connect it directly to the impact that COVID has had on your agency and the survivors you serve?
So there are a couple of questions just to make sure that we answer them. Our program is under Phoenix Counseling, but operate in 2 different counties. Do we apply for 2 grants or 1?
No, they would only apply for 1, and they're considered a standalone, even though they're under an umbrella of mental health.
Great. And then there were questions around, which I know we're going to get to, direct client needs, hazard pay, and client services. And then there's a new one, our capital improvement costs to an emergency shelter to support social distance and prevention compliance permitted with these funds.
Great. So these are great questions that open up for that peer discussion. So I'm going to punt to both Mary, Carrie-Ann, and Monica if you all want to speak into kind of already the ideas that folks have generated.
Sure, thank you. And I will just get us started. And Carrie-Ann, you certainly can. We can do this part simultaneously, so that I don't forget any of them. Excuse me. Sorry, there is already a question in here. So I'll actually start from this question and move up. Can funds be used for video production to be used for PR to raise funds that have been lost due to our store closing because of COVID? So I'm assuming when you say store, you mean thrift store. You can actually do productions, PR. That's actually one of the biggest out-of-the-box topics we're going to talk about, because it is certainly one of the expenses that you could incur a substantial amount of cost if you do any kind of PR campaign or public relations campaign, PSA campaign, commercials, or radio or print. Again, I will reiterate that we're asking, as you consider those things, that you certainly consider your underutilized businesses in your community to infuse money back into your local economies as well by supporting those companies. One of the other things that we've talked about under PR, as I said, is creating a commercial, creating something very localized to yourself, reprinting materials, but I certainly do believe that a PR campaign such as a video would certainly be a great idea. And I think, as you put in the chat, that it directly impacts the impact that COVID has had on your organization, which is beautifully executed along with spending CARES Act funding is to think about ways in which, if you're going to do media outreach, that also could include website design, having somebody help you build out your social media. You certainly can refer to both coalitions and other national partners who has done a lot of work in talking about COVID. And the impact to the issue of sexual and domestic violence, but also the impact to your agency as well. Carrie Ann, do you want to talk about hazard pay?
Sure. This is a question we have specifically asked of Mary, and Mary said yes. Hazard pay can be used for this, but again, keep in mind the time frame. But it can be. There's also questions around some aid, like paying an electric bill for a survivor. Again, keep in mind that there's very, very likely, like 100% likely that there will be an audit. So you just want to make sure you keep very good records.
Yes, and regarding those records, one of the things I just thought about with hazard pay, oh, that's great. Can you define hazard pay for this grant? Very similar to those of you who talked to both coalitions we talked about earlier, hazard pay as it directly relates to COVID. Make sure you're being very specific about that. Also make sure that hazard pay is allowable in your policy. I know both coalitions reiterated that throughout since March, but just a reminder that if you're going to do anything, again, this funding will be audited at some point, so make sure that you are aligning it completely with your own internal agency documents. So hazard pay, again, is anything that you can relate directly to the impact of COVID. And I will make a note that we will resend, Carrie Ann, I think you all did a substantial document on hazard pay, so just a reminder that we can send that information out in the mailing as well for local programs to revisit.
And I can put a link to our COVID page and your COVID page in the chat.
Perfect, thank you. We are thinking about a generator so that services are not disrupted and residents would not have to relocate if there's a natural disaster. Would this be allowable cost? I will let Mary chime in here, but certainly if you can connect that to COVID, yes, it does directly. It's not an architectural or structural change to your organization. It certainly is an allowable cost. Sorry, lots of questions coming in. Can we use funds for stipends like cell phones, mileage, so that many staff working from home? How about fees for DocuSign and Zoom? So yes, again, back to those things that you can track in your accounting system, which all of these look like you could. I'm not sure what mileage is, so you may want to clarify in the chat, but certainly mileage generally would be an acceptable and allowable expense. One of the things we also talked about early on is ensuring that your staff have everything that they need to work from home. So I will tell you that equipment like printers is really difficult to purchase and find. So if you are going to do any of those things to make your staff who are still working from home comfortable and appropriate doing COVID, please do so. And certainly DocuSign and Zoom. Again, Zoom is a pretty substantial cost if you get an unlimited package that you certainly should and can be using to ensure. And we will also in the COVID webpage at NCCASA and NCCADV, it also has details around security measures if you are going to use Zoom or any other platform with clients. So make sure you refer back to that just for your own knowledge as you look through that. Sorry, I'm trying to catch up with your chats.
So there was a question about capital expenses. The shelter needs a roof. And can hazard pay be retroactive back to March?
That's actually a good question. The grant does go back to March. Now, I would say, and I'll let Mary chime in, you certainly should be talking to your auditor as well about back pay, because any pay to your employee is payment, is actually your salary or however you determine that you pay your staff, whether it's exempt or non-exempt. So indeed, make sure that you are documenting that and talk to your auditor about the impact of back paying staff. But I certainly do believe that you should ensure that question is answered.
So Monica, one of the aspects of the grant that everyone needs to keep in mind is the supplanting clause.
Yes.
So if you were already putting the cost of your employees on another grant, then you can't use this grant to pay for the same employees for the same work for the same time. So you would need to be able to have documentation that they are doing different work or work specifically related that's not being paid for by another grant.
Thank you, Mary. That's a great additional audit barrier to be concerned about in clause of all of your grant contracts, which is something also to be reminded of. You can supplement, which means you can add to or amend, but you cannot supplant, which is to use in place of when you've already designated. I think I missed a question you said, Carrie, but I can't remember. Oh,
the roof for the shelter. There was a question about are capital expenses allowed?
Mary, I will put that one to you.
Again, the COVID-19 connection has to be a direct one. So it's not a bucket list kind of funding that's allowed here, but say, for example, you need to make modifications to your shelter because of the social distancing requirement, and you need to do some changes that allow you to keep people safe and to shelter people differently, then that would be a direct connection.
Can we use computer equipment, laptops? Yes, please do. Yes, you should absolutely. Again, I like that BJ immediately connected it. Anything you're purchasing to support your staff from home is directly related to COVID. So not just printers, but laptops, headsets, any, like, I have staff who have a back issue, so a lumbar support for me was important because that's an employee. They're not that expensive, but something to think about in terms of comfort and space while staff are working from home. Self-care stipends for staff who have been impacted. Again, make sure you tightly define that. Self-care stipends are also already allowable for your agency.
There was a question also about a billboard for awareness. Absolutely, for outreach is allowable. So there was a follow-up question about the capital expense for the roof. So the key thing is being able to tie it to COVID. So part of the question would be how the roof ties to COVID, correct, Mary?
That's correct. And I can confirm, double check on that one, but I understand that you can't offer services if you don't have a roof over your shelter. And so it seems to me that utilizing the funds so that you can provide the shelter services would be a connection that you could make, but I do want to confirm that one.
Okay. Yeah, the feedback is we could not fundraise for the roof because of COVID. So, yeah. So we will follow up.
There's also a question in the chat that was missed around COVID. Can COVID expenses to reopen our thrift store, such as capital expenditures, extra staff needed, etc., be utilized? Can we utilize these funds for that?
Stacy's asking about if they weren't able to fundraise again, but because they had to cancel it, and we would have used that money by now, but don't have it. So I think that's an example. Again, to Mary's point, she will double check, but write that out, and she will ensure that that can be responded to appropriately by DOA. Can we exchange cloth, furniture, sofas, chairs for leather? That is allow easy cleaning during COVID. Great idea. Perfect tie into COVID already in the chat. And again, one of the options that we haven't talked about is everything that you possibly could be doing to upfit or modernize your office around COVID. So someone mentioned in the chat using funds to reopening the thrift store, upfitting social distance requirements for the thrift store.
There was also a question in terms of funding new equipment, laptops, cameras, printers, etc. Is there a dollar amount we need to stay under in order not to have to do the extra work of labeling all the machines?
Okay.
That's pretty much up to you.
Okay, so that inventory requirement isn't in play?
With auditing, you will have to account for the equipment that you purchase, and you will need to document the funds that were used and how the equipment is being used.
Okay.
Somebody asked a question, Mary, if they want to apply for less money, which is a good question. We have several of our counties, several of our agencies that serve multiple counties. So that's a great question. Can they apply for less?
Absolutely, you can apply for less. It's certainly not the part of the reason that we're talking about ideas is to help you think outside of the box, and to think about how you could anticipate providing the services and meeting the needs that you have communicated during COVID-19. So you are allowed to contract with vendors. You are allowed to be creative, for example, in providing support for the educational needs of youth who are in your programs or your youth outreach strategies. So I would just, before you decide immediately not to apply for all of it, I would encourage you to think about how you might be able to utilize the funds creatively.
So there was a distinction of the question between supplies and equipment. I would say use the same definition for equipment, which is items that you would inventory. And so again, if you're going to purchase a copier, so you're not going to have a copy maintenance guy come into your office, that certainly is equipment, whereas if you are leasing a copier, it's not an equipment. It wouldn't be inventoried in your equipment. So anything that you purchase that you have to inventory is the baseline that I would use for accounting for in your accounting and also your inventory documentation. Somebody asked, can they pay hazard pay outside of the grant time frame, like in 2 installments? I'm not sure what you mean. So one can raise your hand and we can acknowledge you so that you could ask the question out loud, but I certainly will remind you that it has to be expended, accounted for by December 30th. But if you'd like to raise your hand and be noted, we certainly will do that if that's not the gist of your question.
And there was also a question if a COVID year-end bonus was allowed for employees instead of hazard pay. Mary?
Yeah.
I can't see that that would be allowable. I can just, I know hazard pay for employees who are doing additional work outside, basically continuing to work, and during COVID-19 with greater exposure, I believe count as hazard pay, but a bonus for your employees, no, I don't see that qualifying. Hiring temp employees, temps to do additional work or augmenting your staff would count.
And administrative leave for employees unable to work from home, if it's in policy.
Okay, did I miss any other questions? I still don't see any hands raised, but please make sure you can certainly raise your hand to.
There's still another question around, did we answer the question about COVID related thrift store expenses in order to reopen?
Again, I mean, the answer is yes, if you can tie it back to COVID. I also saw that somebody gave another example that's outside the box, like touchless toilets, faucets, hand dryers, all things that would be expenses that you would need to upgrade for COVID. Air purifiers, all those things I would recommend thinking about, especially for those of you who absolutely are already going to have people coming in, your staff, if your staff is back in. So yes, please make sure that you're doing that.
Monica, if you are delivering services and using your thrift store as part of your outreach strategy, which I know some of you have done, to me that would connect to COVID, but you would definitely have to show the connection.
Yes, we will keep reminding you all of that. We'll put it in the documentations. We're going to try to capture this as a Q&A after we do the Thursday call as well, so that we can put as many questions and answers that we've received. So we will continuously try to update documents for you all. Ardith asked, this may be semantics, but if hazard pay one-time bonus in our policies versus ongoing pay for increased working exposure, would that be okay? So I think what Ardith is asking here is if you pay a one-time hazard pay, again, as long as it's in your policy, because of increased work and exposure, would that be okay? So as long as it's in your policies, it's not supplanting and it's appropriately documented. But again, if that's not exactly what you're asking, please feel free to expand or raise your hand and ask for more clarity.
Forgive me, I don't know how to raise my hand.
Oh, no problem. Go ahead.
I should by now. I'll have my 7-year-old teach me. I have a couple of questions. This is Courtney at Albemarle Hopeline. Will these funds, being that they are federal funds, I assume that means that they would count towards the $750,000 threshold of needing a single audit? And if so, would those audit expenses be allowable under these funds?
So I can take a stab at this. I know that all of your grants, I think, allow you to include audit costs. So again, only audit costs are allowed if they're not accounted for in other grants.
Okay. And then I was wondering, with the December 30th end date, we normally, our pay date is the last business day of the month, which would be December 31st. Do you anticipate that that would be a problem for December pay if we weren't requesting putting 100% of someone's salary towards the grant? So as long as we could prorate the 30 days of December versus the 31 as the portion of the expense that we were attributing, would that be a problem, or do we need to change our payroll date?
I don't think that would be a problem, but that's an excellent question.
It really is a great question. So so I put in the chat how to raise your hand. If you click on your participants, the little box will open up to usually to the right hand of your screen. Your name is generally at the very top, and then just look down to the bottom of that long list and you'll see a blue raise your hand. So for those of you, hopefully that'll be helpful. Somebody also asked, can you go back and pay for things that were already paid for that are related to COVID. Again, you can't supplant. So if that is paid for, is generally probably could be by your grant funds, then that would be considered supplanting legally. But if you have a more specific question, one, you can put it in chat or raise your, or ask us. The other piece is I always remind people that if you ever are going to back pay something, I always ask my auditor to be sure that they are double checking for me that it is not supplanting. But generally, that's the most cautious thing when back paying anything.
There was also a question about prepaying for things, like prepaying cell phone bills through March.
That's a good question. As I understand it, the real key here is you have to actually have received an invoice and have issued a check or a payment for the service. So that's the caveat.
And then there was a question, can funds be used to offset lost revenue from thrift stores when closed that would, oops, it moved, that would have been used for general operating expenses? For example, salaries not covered by grants, office supplies, etc.
Well, I guess that's, to me, that's the reason why the funds are being provided, is because we made the case that the agencies have incurred a great deal of expenses. And so I don't know if I'm answering the question there, but the purpose of this is to pay for expenses that you have incurred due to COVID-19 and to offset your costs, your loss, because you have been unable to do fundraising.
Then there's a question, will budget adjustments be allowed due to the quick turnaround? We are having a hard time finding things due to COVID. I just wanted to share also that we've discussed possibly if people are able to find things that lots of people are interested in, having a potential, like a Google Doc or something, so we can share where folks have successfully sourced items to try to help with that a bit. But what is your stance on budget adjustments, Mary?
You are provided a great deal of flexibility with budget adjustments in this grant. Based on the FAQ that I have received from the NC Pandemic Recovery Office, you have the flexibility of adjusting the budget for at least 20% of the expenses without approval.
Thank you, Mary. So another thrift store question, are thrift store employees who have worked through COVID eligible for hazard pay?
Hazard pay is largely subject to your policies. So if your policies say that thrift store employees working through COVID and hazard pay policies have to be uniform across your staff policies. That's one of the requirements, regardless of how their position is funded. So if other employees are eligible for hazard pay under similar circumstances, then all employees have to be eligible for hazard pay under those circumstances. So if the circumstances are met, they would be eligible.
Thank you.
And then there's another question about year-end bonuses that are usually tied to fundraising throughout the year. Since they can't do fundraising or couldn't do fundraising so far during COVID, there may be no bonuses. Would those bonuses be allowable in any way? And it sounded like Mary was saying no to to the
Yes,
bonus
I
piece.
don't
Yes.
believe that you can use
Yeah.
the fund for bonuses, and I do understand the logic there. I just don't see that being an allowable expense or one that would play out with the auditors.
And then there's a question, if we are not able to spend all funds, can we just repay unused money?
Yes, any money that you do not use, you would have to return to us. We absolutely do, however, want you to brainstorm and think about some other solutions. For example, I know I was on one of the calls with the regions, and agencies were talking about their FIPSA funding, the CARES supplemental FIPSA funding, and realizing that they had not asked for funds for the cost of providing tutors for the kids in the shelter who are now having to be online for school. And wow, they wish they had thought about that at the time of the application. So I would say give yourself some flexibility so that if you think about something that occurs in the next 3 months, you have that flexibility to address that issue or that need. That's what I would say. And I thank you, Coalition Partners, for continuing to be available and brainstorm ideas and facilitate those discussions.
Mary, sorry, I have a question. I just didn't have a way to raise my hand.
Sure, go ahead, Joshua.
Yes, the question that I have is, I think there's been a lot of talk about hazard pay, but do we have an appropriate threshold that we should charge hazard pay? Because sometimes for things like overtime or anything, there are always rules like it has to be time and a half or 1.5. So is there a percentage, or is it just according to the policy that you have to use in order to pay hazard pay?
My understanding is it's according to your policy. You just have to be able to document and track the time. So employees may be covered for the time that they have devoted to the COVID-19 mitigation. And you have to be able to demonstrate the percentage of the time that they are spending for that purpose.
Okay.
You don't have to give me that information. You just have to have it available for when the auditing happens.
Thank you so much, Mary.
Yes, and our direct servicing positions not currently grant funded eligible. So I'm assuming Caitlin's asking if the staff don't provide direct services, are they eligible to be funded under this grant? Again, agency basic policies and tying it back to COVID. And Mary, anything you want to add here?
No, that's perfect. Yeah, it has to connect to COVID. So if the staff who are normally providing a service, for example, have had exposure and they are unable to work and you have to get other staff engaged, then that's a perfect example of staff now fulfilling a duty that they weren't going to be expected to do previously. And yes, that's hazard pay eligibility.
Yes. Would routine office utilities be appropriate, not new or large, because of COVID, but has been harder to fundraise for the unfunded overhead expenses? So Mary can chime in here again. As long as those are expenses incurred during this grant time frame, and again, you're connecting it to your current COVID impact.
Yes, utilities are, yes, you can include utilities.
Mary, this is a question if their company vehicle. We talked about purchase, but we did not talk about servicing. So they're asking, can their company vehicle be prepared and or lease one?
Are you saying that you already have a vehicle and you need to get it serviced and you want to use the COVID funding to get it serviced?
Yes, I think that is the question. And Caitlin, please chime in if that's not what you're asked. I think it was Caitlin.
It's Tammy.
Tammy, sorry.
Yeah.
So please, Tammy, feel free to unmute yourself and chime in to correct the question if you need to.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Yes. You need that vehicle to be in operation during this time and to help you provide services. Yes.
Can we use development person? This is interesting. When can we use a development person's salary? She is not on any COVID grant, but doing more grants for COVID.
I guess you would need to demonstrate how she is revamping your fundraising strategy and during COVID to educate people about the fact that you're still here. And as part of that outreach campaign, they are being informed about your services and given an opportunity to contribute.
Okay, thanks, Mary. Sorry, Stacy, I didn't mean we talked about it on here. Asking the question about paying off the lease of their current vehicle with this money because they're using the car more frequently because cabs and Uber may not or are not providing COVID precautions. So paying off an existing lease is the question, Mary.
I guess, again, as long as you can demonstrate you're using the vehicle for COVID-19 related needs and the lease expense is not on an existing grant.
Correct. Carrie,
There was also a question about an electronic record system, as they're a dual agency that also provides counseling to their clients and uses an electronic record system. Would the cost of this be allowable?
And you will see that as one of the things that we do have listed here on this CARES Act funding ideas that we brainstorm. Electronic filing database systems are allowable.
But again, make sure you tie it back to
COVID. Yeah. That's all right. Yeah. Do the same requirements for procurement apply regarding the 3 bids for goods and services if expenses over $5,000?
That's a good question. I think there is a waiver on that, but I will follow up on that. I've seen NC Pro issue in their FAQ flexibility with regard to the 3 bids.
Can you upgrade your vehicle? Brenda, are you noting buy a new vehicle? And again, I like how you're already connecting it to COVID. Leather seats easier to clean.
Yes, our vehicle is, it was donated and it is basically almost inoperable. It's not safe. You can hear things rattling when you are driving. So we have been kind of using our own vehicles and transporting clients because we're able to clean the seats with Lysol and sanitize them a little bit better than having the cloth.
Need to follow up with you on that just to make sure that purchasing a vehicle, and I understand you are able to connect it to COVID-19. You are asking, can you purchase a vehicle with these funds, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Okay. Carrie Ann has reposted the link for you all. Any other questions I may have missed, Carrie Ann? Or people can feel free to unmute yourself and chime in.
Yes, please chime in if we missed anything. We were trying to track them all, but I know sometimes there were follow-ups and things, and we just want to make sure we got your questions answered.
And again, you'll get this PowerPoint presentation that lists a couple of other things, like translation services, especially if you're creating any kind of campaign outreach material. Certainly, please do consider translation services as you work through anything that you create for clients to ensure it's accessible for all of our folks during COVID.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, can you see me? I think whatever. I'm here. Hello. I have a question about the lease and supplanting versus all of that. So a lot of these things are written into our budgets. Like obviously we have utilities written into our budgets for, you know, almost all of our grants, a portion based on allocation. And we're in the same predicament where we have a lot of money that's going into our 99s, which would normally be paid for with fundraising, but we didn't have any fundraising, so we don't actually have the money, or we're running out of money in our other grants. So we obviously wouldn't, like if we bought our car outright, then that would actually save us money in our other grants, but we do have written into our other grants portions of the lease. Now, obviously we wouldn't then keep on billing for the lease in those other grants and bill it twice because, you know, we wouldn't have that expense anymore. But that would be great because the idea is that would then free up some money in our other grants, which are super tight this year, and we wouldn't go over. Is that allowable or no? Since we have leases written into our other grants, we cannot do anything with leases in this project. Shoot, did I go away?
No, Mary.
I was like, man, I've been talking to myself this whole time.
No, we hear you.
Not my friend.
No, Mary, do you want to clarify that, or do you want to get back to them? Back to.
I think I need to get back to you. I think I
Yeah.
understand what you're saying in terms of you have the payment on the lease for the vehicles, right?
Yeah, and well, everything we're talking about, I mean, even we're talking about utilities and cell phones, like obviously all of our expenses are written into all of our grants. We're not gonna, you know, take this money and then pay ourselves twice, but we would take this money and then obviously those line items that we wrote into other budgets would be reduced, you know, or we would just, you know, do budget transfers in our other grants to pay for more program supplies and things like that, because, you know, because of it all ties back to what everybody's saying. You know, usually we run over in all of our grants, and the extra expenses that the grants don't pay for is paid for with our fundraising money, but we don't have fundraising money this year, so we're in the hole. So it's like all this big, it's all connected. So yeah, I just wanted to make sure, you know, because yeah.
I see what you're saying, and I will just make sure that vehicle purchase or lease is allowable. And all I need is when you're writing your scope of work, to illustrate how you are providing using the vehicles and providing services.
Oh yeah.
If that is part of what your budget is including.
Yeah, obviously. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Can I jump in for a second, just to address something that Stacy just mentioned, because I think I heard the vehicle question that Mary's going to specifically get back on, but part of what I hear emerging is sort of a question around what this definition of budgeted for actually means in the guidance that's coming out about CARES Act funding. So we know that we can't use the CARES Act funding if something was budgeted for as of March of 2020, but it sounds to me like the more specific question that's happening is, what does that mean? Were those funds already in place, or did the funds rely on, you know, future fundraising, which it sounds like everyone was confident before COVID they would be able to meet, but haven't been able to meet. So I think, Mary, if maybe that kind of specific aspect of what budgeted for means could be clarified, that might be really helpful as well.
Okay. When will this grant be paid? I know Mary's going to try to get it out soon, but just in case she has a date, I'll turn it over to you to see if you have an answer to that, Mary.
Absolutely, thank you. The goal, and that's why you have the deadline of the end of September, is because we have to submit an application to OSBM to draw down the money. And so I've been told the money is available October 1. And so as soon as we can get the information from you, compile it, combine it, and get our agency application submitted, then the funds will be available for us to begin issuing payment. So my goal is to get the funds out of the doors early in October as possible.
Thank you. And looks like I'm trying to scroll up, but I'm curious if you've captured any other questions that are in there.
Yeah, there was a question about upgrading our infrastructure for our agency, technology, wiring, et cetera, with all the remote work, laptops, et cetera. Our agency isn't able to handle the overload. Our numbers have increased. Absolutely. Technology and equipment is one of the things on that slide, just because that absolutely you can tie back to COVID. Can direct aid include food cards, gas cards for clients, those kind of things? And I know we had a conversation about the issues with that around some of the federal funding, but Mary, can you shine a little light on that with this around gift cards for clients? Again, the audit piece.
Yeah, the audit piece. Sure, you can buy. I would just, again, these funds will be audited, and so the agency is the one that is responsible for the explanation of how the funds were used and the assurance that the funds were used for the purpose as intended. So it works out better if you're buying the gift, the gas cards or whatever, because you can then prove that your agency is the one that bought them for this purpose. I don't know if that made sense. So you don't want to take any of this money and directly give it to a client, right? But providing the client with support services is what you're asking, and gas cards are support services, but it's on you as the agency to verify that those gas cards were used for the purpose as intended.
Excuse me, this is Joshua. I saw the slide that just passed. There was something to talk about school needs. If you can just retain that slide, I had a question. Yes, the bottom line, which says school needs computers, desk, childcare, things to support staff and clients who have students in VA. But is this also apply? Is this Virginia is also applying to North Carolina?
I don't know what VA is. I think it's virtual learning or virtual education. I think that's what that is.
Yeah,
Okay.
virtual academy VA is what some districts are calling it, but it's your online learning for your students.
Okay, so does this mean that then if there are some staff that need some desk or anything for childcare, can we help them, or is it just clients? What would be the best here, or both?
Sorry, I'm going to try to clarify your question, Joshua. You're asking if those supplies can be purchased for your staff's children? Is that what the clarification is you're asking?
Yes. Or childcare, for example. I know on the staff side, yes, for those that don't like advocates, they need computers and other things to work from home. But are they eligible to buy them a desk that they put at the house or to pay for their childcare? For clients, obviously, yes, but for staff, I was just trying to clarify whether they can buy furniture or pay for childcare.
Carrie Ann, I know this was one on the list that you shared with me that you and your staff had brainstormed. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
We were speaking more about childcare for the survivors than for staff, so I'm not sure about that, but we were discussing the possibility of particularly one of the hub businesses, for example, being able to provide childcare so that potentially survivors could participate in things like the job training or coaching that Mary was talking about, or being able to go to work. So less for staff. So I'm not sure what the thoughts are about staff.
And I would not see these funds going for staff costs for unless, for example, these are, like we said, printers for staff who are teleworking, or computer equipment or upgrades or chairs or things like that. But certainly staff who are delivering services and they need equipment, that kind of thing. would be, so if they need desks to provide tutoring for children, or if they need musical equipment to provide activities for children who are in the programs, then those supplies, absolutely.
So there's two questions that have popped up in the chat. Monica had to jump off, so I'm going to help Carrie Ann. Actually, there's a couple of them. Christy is asking if region directors will have more information or ideas about expenses. So Mary, do you want to answer that question?
No, this project is not being managed by our region offices at all, because they are currently managing our state grant appropriation and contract amendments, which we definitely want you to still work on. So that's why we're working in partnership with our coalitions. So if you have questions that you have not gotten answers to, just put them in the chat, and between the three of us, we'll do our very best to get you answers as quickly as possible.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. So Stacy's asking about the loaning out of iPads that they would purchase with these funds for clients to use for virtual therapy who don't have access to devices. Would this be okay?
That would be a yes.
Okay, so that's a yes, Stacy. Again, make sure all your policies back up whatever it is that you're doing. Vicki, can we use the funds for tutors for staff to be able to be at work? Based on the previous answer that for the question Joshua asked, I would assume that that answer is no. Yes, Christy, the PowerPoint will be sent out to, and Carrie Ann answered that question. Thank you to all the EDs. We have about a little less than 10 minutes in our time together. As Mary mentioned, try to get all the questions you can in the chat. We are capturing it, so if we don't answer it in this time together, we will issue responses to the questions. In addition to, there will be a second offering of this on Thursday, which I'm gonna scroll to that slide so you can see it, that you all can participate in and continue to ask these questions. The other piece is both coalitions are jointly going to be offering a time via Zoom this Friday from 1:30 to 2:30 to provide TA and answer more questions about the utilization of these funds. If you click the link with Join Us, you'll be able to join that Zoom link whenever, if you are wanting to participate.
As we're wrapping up, I don't know if Sky ever made it onto this call, but I wanted to kind of speak from the legislative advocacy perspective and say, first of all, again, reiterate the thank you that Monica issued at the beginning of the call to everyone who participated in making and doing advocacy around this, because it was really important and impactful. And you know, as a result, we were able to get a lot of money in helping by helping make the case that you helped us made. As I'm hearing and seeing questions around not applying for the full amounts or repaying amounts that don't get spent, I do want to just emphasize and say, understandably, that those are questions that you all have. And also, please know that we're here to support you all in thinking creatively about needs that can be met, that are legitimate needs that are arising out of COVID, but that may not be topmost in everyone's mind, because we want to make sure that when we do this kind of legislative advocacy, you know, it can impact future efforts if we're then not able to, you know, use the funds that are expended. So hopefully that won't be the case, and we'll be able to find ways that are legitimate, good uses of the funds, and ways that mean that we're being good stewards of the funds, but that are also still responsive to the needs that you all are having. So don't hesitate to reach out. We're happy to help, and we're happy to continue advocating in the legislature for you all in the future around funds and money. And also, we want to be good stewards and make sure that we're making the best use of what we do get when we ask for it. So I'll just end there and say thank you again for everyone for participating in the ask, and we're here to help going forward. So.
Thank you, Sherry.
This is Mary. I would just like also to let you know I will be accessing and providing you either a link to the historically underutilized businesses, which are women-owned and minority-owned businesses, putting that on our website and sharing it with both coalitions, so that as you start to think about vendor partnerships, whether it's for food or transportation or tutoring or catering services or any other kind of services you're thinking about, that you also think about how to connect with those vendors in your communities that are women-owned and minority-owned businesses.
Excuse me, this is Michael with Outer Banks Hotline. Can I ask Mary a question before we get off?
You sure can.
All right, I'm not sure if this has been addressed, but what exact pages are you looking for when we initially send the first, send in the application?
What pages am I looking
Yeah,
for?
so, I mean, I know you're not looking for the final status report pages. When we first send in, you're just looking for like page 1 through 6 or?
That's correct. I'm not looking for the final report, but I'm looking for, yes, all of the pages, including the payment request page.
Okay, I just want to make sure. All right, thank you.
Thank
1
you.
through 7, I mean, because that's the budget amount, so 1 through 7.
Mm-hmm. And the travel, I realize that it's there. Probably you won't be spending a lot of money on travel. So there is an other category. So as you're brainstorming about how to respond to your needs, if there are other categories for expenses, please go ahead and put that in there, in the other category.
All right. Thank you, Mary. Carrie Ann, the chat has disappeared from my screen. So is there anything else in these last couple minutes that's popped up?
There was a question about if there's any ability to fundraise with the funds, since federal funds normally don't allow fundraising.
I really don't see how the fundraising piece would be allowable. I would see education and outreach being allowable, but not directly fundraising.
And communications, Mary?
Absolutely, communications.
Yeah.
And we know that part of the challenges that people are having now is making sure their communities know they're still here and they're still operating and they're still wanting to provide services, particularly as you head into Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So this is a great opportunity to gear up with the kind of We're Still Here campaign, and utilize these resources in that regard. And part of the ask for money is effectively friend building and letting people know you're still here and you need their support in whatever way that looks like, right? So I guess I'm saying there's a gray area there, but I don't see the funds being used directly for fundraising costs.
And there's a question, do we need to have contracts attached with the application?
No.
And I have attached, included in the chat, a link to a shared Google spreadsheet to track items that are sourced. Feel free to add a column if something else comes up that would be helpful. You should all be able to edit it. So feel free to go back and look if people have found things like PPE or a contractor that can help with something on short notice so that we can all benefit from each other and make sure we're spending the funds.
It looks like Courtney has raised her hand. Courtney, just unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay. I was excited I learned how to do it. No, sorry. Now, I just wanted to get, I'm not trying to beat a dead horse here, but just to get some clarification. I mean, a lot of people asked questions about expenses at their thrift store. There was a question about taking out billboards, asking for donations. So I just was hoping for some consistent clarification about what would count as fundraising and what would not.
A billboard is outreach and counts and could definitely be used. So that one I can say for sure.
A solicitation letter would not be outreach. A campaign that only focuses on asking donors to contribute would not be outreach. Give me another example of fundraising that you want to consider.
It wasn't necessarily for my agency. I just thought that over the course of the chat questions that maybe there were some, like I said, there was a lot of questions about thrift stores and things like that.
Thrift store expenses, in my mind, if the thrift store is utilized and you can demonstrate that it's utilized for outreach and information sharing and providing information to people about your services, that would be a connection that you can make and a cost that would be justifiable.
All right, so we are at 10:30 on the dot. I know that folks have a lot of questions. It's been a lot of information in one sitting. And so again, some other reminders. So we have recorded this webinar this morning. And so once that is done downloading, we will be sending that out. Both coalitions will, in addition to the PowerPoint today. That will be sent out to both coalitions' ED lists and mailing lists. Second, we have recorded the chat, so we will start going through those questions and creating a document that will be sent to folks where we are answering those. Second or third, we will be offering another webinar on Thursday from 2:30 to 4. It's the same exact one as today, but if you all are interested and want more time to process and be in space with us, you can be a part of that. And the link not only is here in the PowerPoint, but also can be found on Council for Women's website for the grant application. And then lastly, this will also be placed in the mailing that both coalitions will be doing jointly a Zoom call on this Friday from 1:30 to 2:30 to provide TA and answer more questions about how to spend these funds. And so we'll include that link for folks. Carrie and Mary, are there any wrapping up thoughts that you all have before we completely close out today?
I would just say, please don't hesitate to ask and think creatively. And it's also an opportunity to maybe consider working together. There are lots of different ways that we can make the most effective use of these funds to serve survivors in North Carolina. So if we can be of any assistance, please let us know. And thank you to everyone who helped advocate for these funds.
Great. Mary, is there any last offering you have?
I don't see her on the list anymore. I don't know if she needed to go. So.
Mary may have jumped off the call. So again, thank you all for your time today. Thank you for being patient and flexible as we're all working through this process together of this wonderful gift of additional funds with some things to process through of how we make the most of them in this time frame. Like Carrie Ann said, both coalitions are here to support you and answer questions and encourage you to think freely and creatively about how you want to make the most of the funds so that, as Monica mentioned at the top, we can continue to advocate that this should be the baseline funding for agencies, period, whether COVID-19 or any other pandemic is occurring. So we won't be able to do that unless we all work together. And so we appreciate your openness and flexibility in allowing the coalitions to provide some insight of some things to think about. I hope you all have a great day. Maybe I'll see you again on Thursday, and I hopefully will see you all on Friday as we continue to talk about some other ideas and the technical assistance that both coalitions can provide to you all through this process. Have a great day, everyone.